Hey guys, it's Maple here once again, and as you can see, I did end up fully converting into self-cast, as I said will probably happen. Simply put, tier 15, tier 16, it just feels a lot better on self-cast, and the damage is just too goddamn good as self-cast to pass up, as seen here, kind of giving Shaper the old business. So, paired with Vile Summon Skeletons and a pretty good setup of a Dark Pact, you can do some very meaty damage indeed. At this point, all of these clips I'm showing you are on a 5-link, but the rest of my gear is pretty damn solid, and there's not too much room for improvement. Besides what I'll talk about a bit later, which is Void Batteries, and just a couple of little jewelry upgrades and a level 21 Dark Pact. So you are looking at more or less close to the most DPS I can pull off without investing another 10-20 exalts, something like that. And it's really quite good. So on a 5-link, I don't think I've experienced anything too much better than this for pure DPS, and especially with Vile Summon Skeletons. Now that's not always going to happen, as you can see. When it does happen, it's pretty amazing. Sometimes though, a lot of the fights just don't facilitate Vile Summon Skeleton summons or, survivability, and so you can't really rely on that for most fights. It's kind of just a gimmick for a lot of fights up until tier 16, and then a few certain encounters against Shaper, Atseries, and various other parts in the tier 16s, but it's not something you can rely on at that stage. It's just something that will be potentially there for you to use if everything goes just right. Having said all that, I don't need to use Vile Summon Skeletons in a lot of these encounters, and I certainly don't. It's just wanted to show you what the DPS is when you do get them just right. And then I do have an example of just killing Shaper here without Vile Summon Skeletons, which is what most of the phases I do. Didn't even pop Vile Haste here either. Ultimately, my DPS is something like 1.5 to 2 million against Shaper. And then this is my first attempt at an Uber Atsiri, which was pretty damn nice just for the, the first kill there. And then you can see when I pop those Vile Summon Skeletons, things get pretty insane. I didn't manage the last guy very well, so I almost died, but you can see that with a 6-link especially, this should be some seriously face roll shit. And then Uber Atsiri, kind of a bit sketchy, because for the 6th-link here, it's kind of important, because I really do need the 6th link of Critical Strike Gem to have the reliable damage to kill everything before it comes anywhere near touching me. This is still Uber Atsiri, it is my first attempt on it, and I did just about all of it deathless, and it's definitely doable, completely deathless, and farmable with a build like this. So self-cast DP Occultist, to absolutely no one's surprise, is doing pretty good things. The only real question is it worth more than a Berserker in a similar sort of stage? And I'll talk a bit more about that later, as I don't really have the answer for you. I haven't played a Berserker, I haven't really seen any of the Berserker versions out there. I've just watched Ziggy play a little bit of his, and I'm aware that Berserker's fucking amazing all in all, but I will show you a bit of a comparison on the path of buildings for how the two can be different from each other, and what is basically the strengths and weaknesses of both. But just a bit more about the Occultist here. You can see this is a Poor Joe's. I'm running Ice Bite on this because it helps give you frenzy charges, which is just a bit of a faster playstyle. As well as that, it adds a lot of additional cold damage, and then we can shatter these monsters and it becomes a lot safer. Now the clear speed at this stage, I'm not even running a Bright Beak, ends up being really fucking good, and it is one of the most satisfying characters I've played in a while. Even if people are already kind of sick of Dark Pact and saying it's a bit boring, I still think it's extremely fun to play if you haven't touched it at all. It's just a very smooth experience, a lot of extra damage, and a fairly nice sustain and survivability under the right circumstances. Now the last thing I probably want to show you for this character as far as gameplay goes is the tier 15 Beachhead map. I've done maybe 3 or 4 of these on this character, and it has been very smooth and efficient farming. It's probably been the fastest I've killed the tier 15 Beachheads at, with the most reliability for killing all of these mobs. As you can see, we can clear these portals extremely fast, but something that's even cooler is being able to use Vile Summon skeletons here, and you can actually sustain them 100% of the time on this last portal phase, making it really quite safe, and the damage is absolutely fucking stupid. So I'm clearing all of these portals basically as they spawn, and dropping a new Vile Summon Skeletons whenever it comes up, and it just has 100% sustain, and helps you survive everything that comes out, and kills everything out there instantly. So all in all, this seems to be the pretty much perfect Beachhead farming character, especially for this last phase, because it's completely insane. Even just on the 5-link action without Conk Effect, as I've mentioned, it's been just completely stupid. This farm, I don't know, there's really not much else to say. They're spawning multiple portals, multiple harbingers. It's coming out really fast because of, the faster you kill, the faster they're going to spawn and keep spawning shit, and yet we can keep up with it extremely easily and just farm away. The rest of the Beachhead map is just a little bit more dangerous because we don't always use Vile Summon Skeletons, but it's still pretty quick, it's still pretty good, and I have been farming these fairly reliably without really any deaths to this shit, I don't think. They do hit fairly hard, which is why the Vile Summon Skeletons comes into play so nicely here, because you take a lot of damage, especially when a proximity totem comes up, or even overlaps with another proximity totem, and then you just get completely destroyed because you're not hitting or leeching anything, and it can get a bit sketchy that way. So the Vile Summon Skeleton cheese here is highly recommended for this last phase, and I do have a minion life attached to these guys if you're wondering, not spec'd into anything else for the skellies though at all, and overall it still really does help boost your damage quite a lot. So all in all, to me, respeccing into, or just changing the build into pure self-cast by about tier 15 just seemed like the right thing to do. As much as I was having fun with the cast on crit version, and you may be too, I think by the time you get to about tier 15, 16 with the heavier bosses, it makes a lot more sense to be self-cast. And at this point, the character hit 92 quite easily. I could even go a few more levels because I've been having quite a decent time leveling with it. It's very fun for mapping, but I just want to summarize the character and where we're at, and then have a look at the path of building and show you what's happening there too. While I don't have a 6-link in my Covenant, the rest of my gear is pretty solid, and there's not too many upgrades I could possibly be making here. The dagger I'm rolling with ended up costing 15 chaos, and then I crafted spell damage onto it. So if you look out for daggers like this where there's a stat missing and then you can fill it in just by crafting it yourself, you usually get it a bit cheaper than other things. But for a lot of the mapping process, I was running a Bright Beak just for a lot faster shield charges. All in all, this ends up feeling just a little bit slower than Bright Beak, but having much more reliable crit and then damage, so I felt a dagger was very worth upgrading to. The shield, as I mentioned, I crafted with Regals, alt-regaling. I had the spell damage and the crit, regaled it, and then slammed it a couple times with exalts, as some people pointed out is impossible otherwise, because chat loves me slamming things with exalts. So if I could do it again, I'd probably go for much more life, like 100 life, 90 to 100 life on the shield, and scale down the damage a little bit. It's not that important, whereas the life is probably a bit more of an important stat, I'd say. Star Conjure, you don't have to wear one of these. It's just nice for the attack speed, the crit, which is almost nothing, but when you cap the rest of your resist, you may as well try and min-max. And then the life, and the 40% Dark Pact damage is the best enchant we can get, though the cast speed for Dark Pact is very close to the damage-wise, and Lightning Golem buff enchant is also very close. So if you can't get one of those, try one of the other ones, or maybe just some curse effectiveness for one of the two curses we're using. There are plenty of helm enchants you can find for your Dark Pact build. Gloves, just a bunch of attack speed and life and resist. Try and get something there. Movement speed, life, resist on boots. The enchant, not too important, but I managed to get the leech and mana leech you've killed recently, which helps quite a lot for hexproof maps. Otherwise, it doesn't really do too much. Life, strength, a bit of resist, and some reduced flask charges used. And then the jewelry, the more you can spend, the better you're going to get out of the build for damage. So I tried to get at least diamond rings for both of these because I really need to fill out my crit. And then cast speed, if you can, on both of them. I could only get it on one of them, and that costs something like 30 chaos. And then the amulet, I managed to snag for 70 chaos, and then crafted the life on there myself. Ideally, what you're looking for is life, or an opportunity to craft life. some cast speed and crit multi. The spell damage is just some gravy on top, and stats as well if you need them. Try and look for those as well. Ultimately though, crit damage and cast speed are very important on your amulet, and then some life of course. As for our chest, it is the Covenant. It does give us a level 15 added chaos and then some blood magic, which isn't that important, but it does help us just cast without really having to worry about mana at all. So we are reserving all of our mana that way with Warlord's Mark, Assassin's Mark, and Herald of Ice. Though the Herald of Ice, not strictly necessary. I played a lot without it, but it does add that extra shatter and clear. Don't have to use it, but if you do, then you won't have any mana left over to really do anything. So that's why Covenant, Blood Magic, and the Golem sitting here is quite nice indeed. The alternative though could be pretty much anything, but I think a Carcass Jack is something like 10% less damage for us and going to be just a bit more area, so that's something else you could do as well. And you'd of course have to put a level 20 added chaos in place of one of our gems if you use a Carcass Jack. And as mentioned before, this is where we get a lot of our leech, the Atziri Flask. When that goes down, you feel a significant drop in your leech. And of course, with the Diamond Flask, that's where you get a lot of your crit from. Once again, a significant drop if you don't have that up. And I've already mentioned, but it is pretty damn useful to have this Immortal Core setup when it's pressed with your Arcane Surge. When you have 3 charges, it goes up to like 20 something seconds. So that's how you sustain your Arcane Surge. All in all, that is the character for now, and time to move on to some Path of Building action. This is the character plugged in against Shaper with the ideal 6-link scenario. Just got to boost everything up here and show you the basic ideal. So if you got the 6-link with 20 gems, Dark Pact, Void Manip, Spell Echo, Control Destruction, Conk Effect, your 6th link is then Crit Strikes, though most of the time I'm mapping with Crit Strikes and putting in Conk Effect since I only have a 5-link, so bear that in mind. The 6th link should be Crit Strikes just because it fills out the crit to be more reliable, though it will tell you that crit damage is probably just a bit more damage than Crit Strikes. Actually, it's about the same at this point. So Crit Strikes is my 6th link personally. Otherwise, you could go faster casting if you're a bit low on cast speed, though I seem to have plenty at this point. This is a 2.3 million Shaper DPS with everything kind of up, power charges, crit chance, and 20 wither stacks. Now you won't always have 20 wither stacks, but when you put them behind, put your wither totem behind Shaper or next to him or so, you will get some pretty reliable wither stacks, and this damage, as you can see throughout most of the video, is fairly close to being accurate for the 2 million or so. Now improving that damage though, as I mentioned, I could probably get a bit more cast speed on a ring. Otherwise, another level in Dark Pact that takes us up to, takes us up to 2.4 million. But if you put on just a single Apex while still wearing a shield, all of a sudden we're up to 2.7 million damage. You put on a Void Battery, you're up to 2.8 million damage, and then if you dual wield Void Batteries, you're up to 3.3 million. And currently I have unspec'd one of my power charges, because turns out don't really need it if I'm not running Void Batteries. If you are running Void Batteries, you're going to have to spec back into that bad boy and probably drop something. Don't know what you're going to drop, but you know, got to fit that deeps in. And all of a sudden, 3.6 million is going to be basically the pinnacle here, without doing any other crazy shit like making him shocked, intimidated, you know, whatever else. So basically, that is the biggest draw to playing Occultist, I would think. That compared to Berserker, Occultist only really has reliable power charge generation, an extra power charge, and the ability to go Void Battery. Besides that, Berserker I think looks better across the board, just because it's got a lot more reliable leech. Occultist for the crit version of this build is offering you some good power charge and then power charge sustain, and not having to waste any points on travel and all that. Whereas if you spec directly into Berserker, let's just say, point for point without really changing too much, we now have 6,800 life, so we'll drop that and then probably all of that. All of a sudden we're down to 5,915. Yeah, that sounds about right, I suppose. We're no longer an Occultist, we are now a Marauder, Berserker. Let's just say something like that, and then we go over here and here. You proc your Savage hit recently, which is going to be up most of the time. And you're probably not going to be running this anymore. You'll be running the usual setup, something like that. So it's a bit more damage, or yeah, a bit more damage than the other setup. but you won't really have reliable power charge generation. You'll have to turn on Orbit Storm's power charge on crit, and that just won't always work out for you. On the plus side, you do not have to, at that point, use, what do we got here, Warlord's Mark anymore. So you drop that and you just have Blasphemy Assassin's Mark. Then you could probably even drop Herald of Ice in that situation, and quite potentially, in my opinion, also grab Mind Over Matter, and then maybe even spec into Inspiration just for some more reliable survivability. But there's passive tree probably isn't optimized right here for Berserker. It's just a quick example showing you that it is doable as crit. It's just going to take a bit of extra finesse figuring out your passive tree and your setups for power charges, as well as maybe arcane surges and all that. Ultimately, it'll be much better survivability when you have a very reliable leech, and then of course cloaked in savagery. But I think the Occultist was very worth doing, very playable, and something you can definitely do as self-cast Dark Pact if you don't want to be just another face roll Berserker. I have no idea what the non-crit numbers for Berserkers look like. It beats me. I haven't looked at any of them. Maybe this is worse. Who knows? This is just showing you the discoveries and tests I've run, and I'd say self-cast Occultist for Dark Pact, probably my favorite character this league so far. It's been a lot of fun, and I'd say pretty worth playing if you want to try it yourself. Though bear in mind, things like my amulet are pretty expensive, and maybe the Helm enchant. The rest of it, really not too bad. And as far as jewels are concerned, I'll just mention that before we go. Bandit is a Lyra, and jewels are concerned. Crit multi, area damage, spell damage, cast speed. Those are the things you're really looking for on your jewels, mostly just 3 props. You can get life as well, that'd be great. I just couldn't because it was really hard to do. So I'll go ahead and share the paste bin for the just Occultist version of this. And then you can figure out the Berserker one if you want to try it yourself via this video, I guess. Otherwise, just look at some other people's builds. Maybe they've already got some Berserker action ready for you to go. For now, though, thank you very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the build, the video, and the guide, we're going to call it. And I'll see you next time.